was a question that I'm interested in about the hypochlorous acid spraying of rooms.
Okay, yeah, fogging of rooms has been suggested, as has upper level UVGI, ultraviolet light, germicidal irradiation. And those things are fraught with a number of problems. First of all, the hypochlorous acid spraying in rooms, they're using it on planes, but there are many, many issues related to corrosion and combinations with other materials in the room and other chemicals that we may use. The research hasn't been very compelling for dental and medical environments. So fogging is one of those things that I would hold off on until we get clear direction and we know what to look out for. And upper level UVGI is something that we have to remember has some real limitations as well. The UV light only goes where it goes. It doesn't go where there's any shadow. So there's that limitation. It takes a certain period of time and a certain strength. So I would say right now, limited resources to give us good direction with that. Unless you work in a medical facility where they already have protocol in place for that, I would feel uncomfortable at this point until something new comes up that gives us a little more assurance of efficacy and safety. Hope that answered that. Okay, shall we go?
Yes.
Okay, we're going. All right, other disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, explosions, and poisoning. I just couldn't get any more positive, could I? All right. So tornadoes, these things go blasting through. They can be quite surgical, and they just cut a path through areas. We don't have so many here. These were pictures I took. I was speaking at the Hinman meeting in Atlanta when the tornado went through, and we were in the CNN building. So here was the convention hall after the tornado went through. And here's the building, and you can see in the upper left, my room was kind of around the corner up there on the 13th floor. So it was crazy. And that's what it looked like. Everything came out of the building and landed on the ground, and they wouldn't let us up in to see our room. So I had no idea whether the contents of my room were out on the pavement or not. And I wanted to walk over there and see it, but I couldn't, and they wouldn't let us in. So here was the kind of a really weird experience to be kept down in the basement of the CNN Center. On the left, you can see the reporters, and they were broadcasting from outside their own building. We were downstairs looking at the TV you see up on the right, and those were the reporters that were reporting on our situation. So it was weird. It was like, how often do you have a natural disaster at Ground Central for the reporters, and it gets broadcasted all over the world from the very building that got hit. This is the view outside my hotel room. The hotel room next to me, the windows were blown out. They couldn't go in it. Mine was perfectly intact and everything was fine. So I slept there that night. And this is what it looked like in the morning. Those are the Olympic pillars that are normally there. They were all blown over. So these events can happen even if you don't expect them, and sometimes when you travel. So it's good to kind of think about how you would interpret an event if it happens. So you would ask these questions. What is the scope and the nature of the disaster, and which plan would be best? Can I perform first aid? And is there a group of people here that are trained that we can work with? Should we be first responders? For your location where you are, I recommend you buy a first aid book and kind of get people up to speed on that. Could you provide and use personal protective equipment? Recognize and manage health and disease? How fast can you identify signs and symptoms? Can we be the leaders? So here's our challenge. Can we establish our dental office as an emergency resource to the community and patients? Would you really consider doing this? So again, your disaster response plan would have all of these different sections to it, like we talked about before. So here's a scenario. Tuesday morning, 8 a.m., your office is downtown. It's a busy city. You're on the first floor next to a bus stop, 3 blocks from City Hall. You have 3 patients being treated and 2 in the reception area. The hygiene patient is a mother of 3 and has her 4-year-old with her. The crown prep patient is a 30-year-old male, always in a hurry. Today is no different. The other patient is an elderly woman off of her Coumadin for the appointment with her driver waiting. Everyone hears a loud boom and feels a vibration. You glance out the window and you see nothing unusual. Heavy traffic is moving. 9:10 a.m. You hear people yelling outside and you go to the window and you look again. The sidewalks are full of people running. Some people are crying. Someone throws up. Others look sick. One faints or falls. What do you do? What do you do first? Okay, you're going to access communications, your radio, your TV, look for warning systems, stabilize your patient, stop your work, assess the scope and the location. Where is this? Before you exit to the street, consider the possibilities, the risk. Is it a chemical? Would there be chemical exposure? Is there radiation in the air, on dust, on people? Is it an accident? Could it be a bomb? Are you trained to help? And what precautions should you take? So you have to consider the role of your building. Is it shelter or is it involved with the emergency? 9:25, you hear the police and fire sirens. Cars are jammed, stopped. People are running around outside. 9:28, someone enters your office, collapses, clutching her throat, coughing and crying. What do you do? Personal protective equipment for anybody who contacts her or is near her. You isolate her. You get as much information as you can from her. Call 911. Of course, they're busy, right? She says she's on the bus. She was on a bus and it must have hit something. Her eyes are burning. Her throat is burning. 9:40. The police announce on loudspeakers, directing you to stay inside, stay calm. There's been an explosion in a bus near City Hall. You stay inside until they can determine the risk to pedestrians, allow emergency vehicles to pass. The male patient bolts out, trying to get through on his cell phone. The circuits are busy, and he runs down the street. Big surprise, right? The office members call their homes, they call schools, they're concerned about their children. The lines are busy in all except one school 2 miles away, and they say they're locked down, the children are safe. So considerations. The ill woman must be identified as a victim and treated with the others. Is this an isolated incident, or are there other explosions, other things happening? And will there be another one? So those are the things that you're thinking of. So your actions: stay away from the windows. Flying broken glass could happen if there's another explosion. Except you have to post a sign in the window, victim inside for the emergency responders. Keep everyone inside. Shelter in place and wait for the official directions or shut down the building air and look at utilities. So you don't know. You don't want to maybe get air in from the outside if it's contaminated. You've got to wait for direction on that. So again, there's 2 emergency responses: evacuate or shelter in place. So we usually evacuate for fire, hazardous materials, or there's a natural disaster approaching. We shelter in place when the outside has an unknown threat. Natural disaster is already present. You follow protocol previously practiced and you wait for instructions and communicate if possible. So you report the incident to the public health authorities. Find your local numbers at this website. So you're always trying to figure it out, right? What's the nature of the hazard? Is it chemical, like sarin or ricin? Is it biological, like anthrax or smallpox? Is it radiological, like a dirty bomb? Or nuclear, like a power plant mishap? These are the kinds of things that we have to consider. Is it an explosive, an incendiary device? Is it a power failure, flood? Will there be a boil water order? Maybe a train or a plane or a subway or a truck crash, or maybe it's a natural disaster. We're always thinking about the scope of the incident. Is it a single site, multiple sites? Is it the entire city, several cities, a whole geographical region? That we don't know. And we always have to try to figure that out. Let's think about water issues, weather disasters. Evacuate before it happens. That's the best advice, right? Because once it happens, power shuts down, you're kind of literally in deep soup, right? This was New Orleans. So these pictures are pretty common to a lot of us. We've seen these pictures over the years. Remember Katrina? Hurricane terms. It's a cyclone in the northern hemisphere. It goes counterclockwise, and it's a cyclone if it's over 74 miles per hour in winds, and it creates high water. East of the date line, they're called hurricanes. West of the date line, they're called typhoons. So the watch, if you're on a typhoon or hurricane watch, it means you have 36 hours. A warning, 24 hours. Landfall is when the eye of the storm hits the land. The Safran-Simpson scale is 1 to 5, and that is determined by wind velocity. And the storm surge is the increase in sea level over normal. And the storm tide is the normal plus the surge. It's the actual sea level. So some terms to be familiar with. And here's New Orleans when it got completely flooded, and some people stayed, some animals were left. We all saw pictures of this. And then afterwards, there was horrible damage and mold and places that looked okay, but you go inside and it's just filled with black mold, so you can't use them. Now, looking forward to the future, what can be done? Because this is the situation. You're standing right now at street level, looking up a slope, and up at that level, you see a boat, and that is the water level up above you. So looking along the water level and down away from the slope that we just looked at, you can see that the houses are below you. So it's a geographical situation that's going to ever be a problem. For a long time, the bayou was meant to, insulate the land, but a lot of that is being lost. So the storm hits full force right on the occupied land. Now things go back to normal, and the alligators do tricks for marshmallows, and things kind of settle down, but it happens again. So places like New Orleans are going to have repeated problems, and with global warming and rising seas, you can see more and more coastal communities suffering some similar situations. And with that will come insect-borne diseases. So particularly West Nile, which is transmitted both by ticks and mosquitoes, dengue fever, encephalitis, malaria, Lyme disease, plague, and spider bite reactions. So we need to be careful about the bugs, reduce standing water whenever you can, and particularly after a disaster, this is difficult. Quick little shrugging your shoulders, keep both arms at your sides and shrug your shoulders towards your ears, hold them, 1, 2, 3, roll them back and down, open up your chest, take a deep breath. and exhale. There you are. Okay, do we have any questions yet?
Still none.
Okay, we're going. All right, so planning. Plan for 72 hours of support. Okay, so here we're going to prepare to sustain ourselves for 3 days. So the basic services are gone. Let's assume they're gone. And maybe water, power, food, transportation, communication, medical care, police protection, all those things are questionable or gone. What will be the first services restored? Will you be rescued? Those are the questions we ask. Meantime, you need to have checklists and you need to figure out where to locate your supplies and start putting some aside. It's also important that you have out-of-state contact cards and maybe store them electronically on your phone, have cards in your office where you can somehow communicate with people out of the state, because lots of times that works better than even talking to people that are closer to you. Have pre-agreed to plans, what to do, where to go, where you're going to meet your family in case of an earthquake or an emergency, how to get public announcements, and how to coordinate with not just your office, but also your family. Portable radio and TV and batteries are things that you should pack and have. Phones, cell phones, they may or may not work. Shortwave radio may be the only communication available to us. So if you know a crazy hammy, then they're your new best friend, right? The internet may or may not be available. Here are some ham radio networks. I chose San Mateo for the local network, but you can look it up in your area. Really important, because sometimes that's the only thing working. Evacuation. If you have to evacuate, remain calm, assume duties, shut off all mechanical equipment, unplug your appliances and shut off your utilities, close all doors and windows, and get your ready to go packs. And in the handout, I will give you a list of things. Don't use the elevators, assist disabled people and patients, and know your primary route of escape and alternatives, because it may be blocked. Escape routes can be really, really tricky, so practice a couple ways out. If you have to shelter in place, remember that's your safe haven from weather, chemical plumes, radiological clouds, biological exposure. That requires supplies for 3 to 6 days, water, first aid, food, medications. Know the local shelters if you have to go there. And the Office of Emergency Management for San Mateo is listed here. Now, if you have to go to common areas like airports, it may be kind of crowded and lots of people, like I said, don't want to go. If you're setting up your personal emergency kit, you need bottled water, or you need filters or chlorine to treat the water that's available. You need non-perishable foods, flashlight, battery radio and the batteries, and 8-hour glow sticks, medications, yours, extra glasses, medical information that might help people take care of you if you have allergies, things like that. Phone numbers, contact lists, first aid kit, personal protective equipment, and a whistle so people can hear you, sturdy, comfortable shoes, Mylar raincoat and blankets, and cash, small denominations. If you have, say, $50 bills, how much do you think that water bottle is going to cost you? Yep, 50 bucks. Okay, so small denominations of cash, plastic bags, Sharpies to mark those bags. So you can get shelter supplies on the internet. There are lots of different ways of going about it. Tube tents, plastic tarps, thermal sleeping bags, those kinds of things are available, and they're all useful and good. Crank radios, You can buy, say, a 4-person home survival kit, and they've got a full array of the things I just talked about. If you stock up your home and you're all ready to go, even with like the portable toilet, if your family knows that you're all set up, they may all arrive. So this could be good or bad, right? I'm showing you the big barrels of water that I got around the year 2000. I don't know if any of you remember that long ago. The world was supposed to end or something. Somebody sold us all these big barrels of water. Well, there are no spigots on there. You can't just drain them. You have to open the lid and scoop it out or dump them over or something. It was very unusable. We ended up 15 years later throwing them away, and that water must have been awful. So if you're going to buy containers of water, just FYI, buy water that you can access and use. If you're going to maybe be living out of your car, be careful where you park. Don't park in the poison ivy. Look around. You're no longer in the city on the street, so you want to use your best sense of that. Look out for the things that normally live there, and be very, very careful. There are more bugs around, and as things get warmer, there will be more. So mosquitoes, ticks, bats, these are not just an annoyance, they can really carry diseases. So if you go into an area where ticks normally are, check yourself. Be very careful. Look at this guy is like hitchhiking. He's ready to grab your leg. Look at that. Vector-borne diseases. We already mentioned some of these before, but they're primarily vector-borne. So again, be alert. This isn't me, but I like her style, right? She's ready for it. Okay, so these are my little additions to the normal ready to go pack. Venom remover and poison oak and ivy neutralizer, a tick remover, stingray poison treatment with heat. Okay, so maybe this isn't a mass disaster. It's my own little personal disaster because I'm always in the ocean. And I'm here to tell you, it hurts a lot. So I bought this little thing on the internet. It is a reusable heat pad and the washing solution that's supposed to neutralize it. I don't know. If I get hit again with a stingray and I've got this, I'll let you know if it works. Also, antihistamine and cortisone isn't a bad thing. So here's the reminder. Okay, so there's your little reminder. Put together a backpack. We've all got a million extra backpacks. Fill one up with your stuff, stick it in your car, and keep it with you. All right, so you can buy the one-person one, you can buy the many ones, and don't forget keys, glasses, identification, extra undies, shoes, and small cash. Your medications, some key ones, doxycycline, potassium iodine for thyroid protection in case there's a radiological event, emergency medical response kits, personal medications, the ones you must take, the ones you prefer to take. And what if you have pets involved? You might want to put together a little evacuation pack for them too, so you can grab it and go. Red Cross shelters will not accept pets unless they're disability dogs. So you might ahead of time find hotels, vets, animal shelters that will accept them, know the restrictions. Put together foods, meds, cages, leashes, beds, toys, a photo of the animal, their license identification. Maybe they have an implanted chip, that'll help, because they run away, things happen, they're not in their normal spot. And check with the Humane Society. They may know resources for you that can help in an emergency in your area for your pet. Water, you need drinking water. You need over 2 quarts a day, double that in heat. Children and nursing mothers and people that are ill are going to need more than that. You drink what you need. You never ration. You must have enough water. You can maybe reduce your activities, stay cool to reduce the amount of water you need. You need it for washing your hands and your body and food, up to 3/4 gallon a day for that. You need it for preventing exposure to infectious agents, first aid, asepsis, personal hygiene, and for removing chemical agents, spills, suspected agents to prevent injury and illness. So store 5 to 14 gallons per person and rotate that. That's enough for 5 days to 2 weeks. Identify other sources of water, your water heater, ice, that kind of thing. If you have time, fill containers. You may want bleach and dental unit water line products. You could even use those in a pinch to try to disinfect water, but it would be better to use products that are specifically for that. Don't use or wash your hands in or drink contaminated flood water. And waterless hand sanitizers are extremely useful, but don't forget that they're flammable. For purifying water, you need to boil it, disinfect it, or distill it. Portable water filters. REI, Amazon, get one of these things. You cannot carry enough water with you. You will need to filter and use water that's available. That's almost certain. So get one of those. Water sources inside. Shut off the incoming water if it's contaminated. If you have ice, seal it in containers before it all melts. Water heater, the gas and electricity should be turned off. Drink it only if you purify it because it's highly contaminated. You open the bottom drain, close the intake, turn on the hot water faucet to get that water out. Don't turn on electricity and gas while it's empty. You can use the toilet reservoir tank and the bathtub and pipes. Drain the highest faucet first, introduce air, and then drain the lowest faucet. Don't drink out of the bowl, only the bath. Okay, water sources outside. Rainwater, streams, rivers, moving water, ponds and lakes, natural springs. Swimming pools, people have survived drinking swimming pools. I'm a swimmer. I probably have consumed enough pool water to choke a horse, as my mother would say. Never drink bad water, obviously. So water storage containers, you want something sturdy, movable, a usable size, not like what I got. Something that's easy to rotate every 6 months. Get food grade plastic, glass, fiberglass, or enamel lined metal. Don't reuse chemical containers. And get something that you can seal and reseal tightly and label them. These are key. Water system disasters, it could happen. Broken dams, pipes, levees, sabotage dams in the case of terrorism, contaminated lakes or rivers. We could end up with flooding. And every time you have flooding, sewers overflow. So you have biological contaminants and chemical contaminants. And with climate change and drought, or maybe traveling, depending on where you are, when there's flooding, animals sometimes get in there, so you have to watch out. And these are pictures from flooding situations in areas where the snakes live. They get there, and there were cases in Katrina where they found sharks in some of the local waters where normally they're not there. So watch out in the water, of course. And remember that contaminated water causes so many diseases worldwide. It's a normal problem for many people, so it can become a problem if we have a disaster. CRYPTOSPORIDIUM, Giardia, and Cyclospora are spore formers, and they kill people more and more when, or they make people sick, and they're resistant to chemical treatment. So if people are immunocompromised, it can be a very serious condition for them. CRYPTOSPORIDIUM, or crypto, is the most common non-viral cause of diarrhea, and it resists chlorine and desiccation. Legionella is another thing that can be in the water system wherever there's standing water. We know that from our studies of dental unit water lines, but it's common in our pipes and certainly in our, probably in our hot water heater. So be very careful with that. After flooding, don't return until it's officially cleared, because they really have to look for all these hidden hazards. They can be power lines or wildlife, snakes, pests, ground sinkholes. There can be structure cave-ins. The floors and the roofs can cave in after flooding, and contamination like from asbestos can make a building non-inhabitable. Lead paint and other materials that were covered before might be exposed, and released chemicals and products make it unsafe. Certainly mold and things like that can be a problem that are very allergenic and toxic. They can penetrate the building materials rapidly, so they have to be professionally removed. If you do have flooding and there are paper records involved, they'll be destroyed basically. So electronic files, offsite data storage is a good thing, cloud storage. Patient is damaged in about 3 hours and it dissolves in 4 or 5 days. So wet paper, never put it in a plastic bag. You try to lower the humidity and avoid the sunlight. Maybe you can save some of it. Wear protective mold gear to handle it though. Don't use flood damage products. Major equipment is typically not repairable. Water lines, your dental water lines, mold and bacteria will contaminate them. In floods, the sewer is the first thing to overflow, like we said before. Most insurance policies say floods are an act of nature and they won't cover it, but FEMA sometimes will insure for flood damage. So sit up straight. This is scapular retraction. All these little exercises are things you should do during the day when you're treating patients, because they address the tightness that we develop in our shoulders and neck. So keep both arms straight, fists forward, and bring the shoulders back. Tighten your scapular muscles. Sit up as straight as you can and pull in your stomach. And relax. Big breath. Exhale. There we go. Do we have any questions yet?
You know what, Nancy, I just noticed one in the chat. I've been looking in the Q&A. How effective is the hypochlorous acid?
It can be effective because that's what they clean airplanes with. And it does affect, it has an antimicrobial effect, but it can also be damaging. I think I already answered this question. There's more risk involved than we know about, and we haven't been given clear direction. It may damage things and it may combine with other chemicals that are being used. It is kind of a little bit of an unknown, and it's not widely advised that we use that yet. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, let's go. Dental water quality, this will be fast. If you have a boil water advisory, basically don't use the water. Don't use public water for dental treatment, patient rinsing, hand washing, use antimicrobial waterless hand sanitizer or alternative water, and wash your soiled hands with bottled water or antiseptic towelette. Usually when there's a boil water advisory, we don't work, but if you have a separated reservoir type water delivery system, you can do dentistry separate from the municipal water supply, but the water in the sink is contaminated, so you have to be really careful. Your tubing is a reactor and will grow biofilm like crazy. You don't want to drink it or inhale it. You don't want it in your sinuses or lungs. So after the boil water advisory, follow the local water utility guidance, flush all water lines. If they don't give you any guidance, then you flush your water lines and your faucets up to 5 minutes prior to patient care, and you disinfect or shock your dental unit water line for sure, following manufacturer directions. For surgery, you still have to hold the sterile standard for surgical procedures and the potable standard of 500 colony forming units per milliliter for regular dentistry. So just a quick run through on that. All right, so it's July. It's not the flu season. It's Friday morning when your office manager checks the phone and there are 3 cancellations. They are similar, which is odd. One cancels because of a high fever and a headache. One has a fever, rash, and aches. The other one has a fever, vomiting, and a headache. They're all Hispanic. 2 are in their mid-20s. 1 is a teen. You're eating lunch and you get a call from home from your teenager. She came home from school with a headache and a temperature of 103. She was in an outside music festival last weekend, and you warned her about not getting enough sleep and water. So what are the important clues? Fever, similar symptoms, right? All young kids, probably maybe went to the same event. So what would you like to find out from patients who canceled? Were they at the concert, right? So do you report this? And the answer is yes. Okay, so food safety planning. If you have a power loss, you keep the thermometer in the refrigerator and the freezer. This you should do now. Separate from the one with your refrigerator, put a separate thermometer in there. You set your refrigerator for less than 40 degrees and your freezer for 0. You freeze gel packs and water bags. Just a good backup to have. You raise the stored food off the floor in case there's flooding. You keep hot foods hot, cold foods cold. General rule, you avoid between 40 and 140 degrees. So thermometers are things we need to have. Keep your refrigerators safe. If you lost power, you can keep the food safe in your refrigerator for 4 hours. If it's unopened, you're supposed to throw it away after 4 hours. If your freezer holds food, it can hold food up to 48 hours if it's unopened, and 24 hours only if it's only half full. So how full your freezer determines its efficiency. You can refreeze food if it still contains ice crystals, or if with a thermometer it's less than 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And don't taste to see if it's safe. That's sort of common sense, but I would probably have to tell some people I know that. Put dry or block ice in your freezer if you have time to plan. 50 pounds of dry ice will keep an 18 cubic foot freezer for 2 days. And when in doubt, throw it out. You discard all food that's possibly contacted by floodwater. Discard wooden cutting boards, plastic utensils, baby bottle nipples, pacifiers, possibly contacted by floodwater. Why? It's not just the microbes. It could be chemicals that could leach out later, especially an absorbent material. You sanitize your cooking utensils, pans, dishes with soap and water, boil, or bleach. Food. Rationing is okay, except for children, pregnant women, and nursing women. If the water is limited, don't eat salty foods. Eat low fat and low protein because they make you thirsty. Familiar foods are much more comforting. So when you're planning which foods to store, plan the ones you like. Canned and no prep foods are great, but watch the salt. And you might want to go for canned dietetic foods or juices and soups. This is important for the ill, the elderly, to use the lower in salt. And don't forget your pet food. Stockpile regular items and rotate them. Label them and date them, and look at the shelf life. Keep them dry and cool and in the dark. Keep them covered and pest-free if you can. Sealed jars, sealed containers. Select reclosable containers whenever you can. In an emergency, you may want to use a little, close it up, use a little bit more. Inspect everything that's been stored before you use it, and consider portability and access. Store vitamins and protein supplements as well. How much food do you need? The Red Cross says you need enough for 2 weeks. You should eat at least 1 balanced meal a day, and the rest could be like snack foods. Balance your food with water and keep your strength up. So you can buy these things online in, rationed things. I don't know how good they are. They make it look, I suspect they make these look better than they taste, but hey, I don't know. How long can leftovers be left out? This is just good general knowledge. When do you need to refrigerate them after a meal? 2 hours. So Thanksgiving dinner, families around, big holiday, it kind of goes on and on and on. You finally get around to cleaning things up and you notice that it's been like 5 hours since that turkey was brought out of the oven. Is that okay? Really no. Really no. So what is the safe reheat temperature? 165 degrees internally. So in disasters, it's pretty much like camping. So here's a scenario. A morning patient who has been in Thailand and will be leaving again on business the next day is seen for hygiene. The hygienist who works on her tells you later in the afternoon that the patient didn't look very good. The next morning, she mentions she has a headache and she's feeling dizzy, but says it's probably just allergies. The hygienist and the receptionist go to lunch together while you stay behind to finish the paperwork. When they return, the receptionist is virtually carrying the hygienist through the door. She's pale and woozy. The receptionist sits her down on the chair. You come to take a look at her and ask her what's wrong. She says she has a severe headache, neck pain, starts to vomit. The receptionist says she has a little bit of headache too for the last 15 minutes. So what's the best response? Personal protective equipment, 911, get information. Ask the hygienist to try to put her chin to her chest. You're assessing for meningitis type issues. If she can't, if this doubles the pain and she starts to cry out, maybe it's related to the six traveling patient yesterday. Call the patient. The child and the mother come into the reception room now. What do? Do you ask them to leave? You might provide them with personal protective equipment, take their information, ask them to leave, warn them that there may be an exposure, and certainly follow up with them. Consider alerting the health department or the CDC. I would start with the local health department. Okay, how are we doing time-wise? All right, we do have enough time for this cheery little subject of bioterrorism. So we'll go through it. Bioterrorism and biological warfare. It's the intentional use of microorganisms or toxins derived from living organisms to produce death or disease in humans, animals, or plants. So there's a broad range. And there's a long history. Man has been inhumane to man forever. In the 6th century before Christ, the Assyrians poisoned wells with rye ergot. 14th century, plague in the Tartar army. Corpses were catapulted over city walls to spread the epidemic, forcing defenders to surrender. In the 18th century, the British gave gifts of smallpox-laden blankets to Native Americans. In 1940 to 47, Japanese dropped plague-infected fleas in China, causing epidemics. And 1979, there were anthrax spores accidentally aerosolized from military research facility. Remember that? 1984, some of you probably weren't born, but I remember that. 1984, salad bars were deliberately contaminated with salmonella. Desert Storm, biological weapons plants. 1995, Tokyo subway attacks with sarin. 1992, anthrax spores were spread in the US mail. There are many more, but these are just examples of the past. Nuclear terrorism. It causes great destruction, death, and injury is likely. The fallout of vaporized radioactive particles is something that we need to shelter from. It usually causes a wide area of impact. There's initial blast and debris, and then that causes injury and death. And then there's a secondary radiation sickness that would cause long-term population damage. So you should know possible targets near you. Who would want to bomb what? What is near you? And it's a lot of this is available on the internet. So if you know, they could know. And if they know, you better know. So this is just a map of nuclear waste disposal sites, but anything you look up, you can probably find. Radiation threats, radioactive food or water supply. Now, if that's the problem, it causes more fear and chaos than a real threat. It's a local threat. It could be large area, but it would be more diluted. If there are explosives that scatter radioactivity like a dirty bomb, that's a local threat, a blast, and later sickness in that area. Bombing or destroying a nuclear facility, that's bigger. That might cause a meltdown, an explosion, and fallout. Acute radiation syndrome in the area, sickness and death. And if somebody has a small nuclear device, it would cause injury and death as well. Acute and chronic radiation poisoning. So radiation exposure. Radiation is measured in curies, doses received are measured in REMS. The effect may appear years later, as we all know. Now, mild effects may be skin reddening, lesions, hair loss, risk of illness later. Severe effects, you may have organ failure, cancer, and death, and faster onset with higher exposure. The risk depends on the amount absorbed, the dose, the type of radiation, the route of exposure, and the length of time exposed. So this is near me, San Onofre, and we're all aware in this area of the risk. So the preparation for radiation emergency, learn your community plan. Know the plans of the schools and the nursing homes and the daycare, whatever affects your life. Discuss your family plans if something happens. Plan for evacuation or sheltering in place, and have access to local emergency communications and news, like radio, ham radio, computers. During a radiation emergency, you'll probably be told to shelter in place. So you would close and lock all doors and windows, close off all outside air intake, fans, HVAC, chimney dampers, recirculate your air, bring all pets inside if you possibly can, and move to an inner room or basement if you have it, and keep connected if you possibly can. Now, if they tell you to evacuate, follow directions quickly. Take emergency supply kits, have them ready. That's why I have mine in my car. Your medications, all the things that we listed, credit cards, ID, cash. Take pets only if the shelter will receive them, if that's where you're going, and if you're using your own car. So potassium iodide, people wonder about this. Should I use this? Should I have it? It's a stable iodine, like the iodine you find in food, but it's in a pill and it works for 24 hours. You take it only if you're exposed to radioactive iodine. That would be like a nuclear power plant accident or bomb. If you have internal exposure or inhalation, that can cause thyroid disease. So the potassium iodide saturates the thyroid with iodine, preventing the uptake of the radioactive iodine that would be the risk. So it only protects the thyroid gland, nothing else. And the effectiveness depends on how fast you get it, how it's absorbed, and the exposure level. So don't take it if you're allergic to iodine. And fetuses and infants, their thyroids are at the highest risk of injury from radiation. So that's when it's important. You give the full age-appropriate dose. They're all listed here and they'll be on the handout. If public health officials say to take it, the benefits outweigh the risks. Otherwise, it's not recommended for adults over 40, just FYI, because they're at less risk for thyroid cancer and higher risk for an allergic reaction. The risk increase if you take higher dose, you have prolonged treatment, or you have pre-existing thyroid disease, or a newborn is given too much. So get FDA approved potassium iodide from a pharmacist. Be careful where you buy it. Dirty bombs combine conventional explosives and radioactive pellets or powder. The intent, of course, is to create chaos and inflict damage and expose people to radioactivity and cause sickness, cancer, and death. Chemical agents, these could be used as with an act of bioterrorism. So there might be biotoxins. Those are plant or animal poisons like ricin or strychnine. Blister agents, they severely burn your eyes or your respiratory tract or your skin, like mustard gas, nitrogen mustard. Blood agents could be used. They're absorbed into the blood, like cyanide, arson, carbon monoxide. Caustics will burn, corrode skin and eyes and mucous membranes, like hydrofluoric acid. And choking and pulmonary agents cause severe respiratory tract irritation and swelling, like ammonia chloride. So examples, long-acting coagulants are poisons. They prevent clotting, like rat poison. Metals, metallic poisons are like arsenic or mercury. Nerve agents are highly poisonous. They prevent your nervous system from functioning, like sarin or tabin. And riot control agents like tear gas are highly irritating, like mace. So if you get exposed to something, one of the key things you're trying to decide, is this a chemical or is this biological? Because that really determines what you do. So if it's chemical, you might have more immediate effects. Detection is a little easier. Dermal contamination during triage may happen. So if somebody has chemical on them, you don't want to touch that chemical without covering yourself. There is a point source of an outbreak of a chemical. If it's a biological agent, the signs and symptoms may be more delayed. Detection may be harder. There may be less contamination during triage. However, we don't know that for sure. And there may be a point source, but it may be distant and it may be very complicated to discern. And some biological agents are easily contracted from other people and others are less so, of course. So a typical bioterrorism agent would have to meet certain criteria. It should be difficult to detect, invisible or odorless, easy to get, simple technology for delivery. theoretically, they would want to provide a large area of coverage and create fear and panic and lead to more extensive, widespread harm. And it should be cheap. So those are the things you look for. So highest priority, category A, most likely bioterrorism agents are easily disseminated or transported. They cause high mortality rates, potential major public health impact, and they're likely to cause panic, chaos, and disrupt our healthcare systems. So key agents are anthrax, botulism, plague, tularemia, and viral hemorrhagic fevers. So the military, the government are most focused on these most likely risks. Category B, things that are moderate priority because they're less easily disseminated, lower mortality, moderate public health risk, less likely to cause as much damage. And these are brucellosis, food safety threats like salmonella, chlamydia, Q fever, water threats like cholera, things like this. And category C, these are emerging. These are much less likely, but we got to keep our eye on them. They may be possible in the future. There are available components. They're easily produced or disseminated, potentially high morbidity and mortality, flu, Napa virus, hantavirus, Ebola, these kinds of agents. So there are unique challenges with bioterrorism. The event may not be suspected. The first clue may be casualties, and then you're working backwards. The first responders may be the ones that are exposed. Healthcare workers typically are unfamiliar with the signs and symptoms, so the cases may occur far away. It's detected in another area. You've got to work your way back to find out what it was. The population usually is susceptible. They don't have immunity, and person-to-person transmission may be possible for some agents. So let's look at anthrax. It's common in sheep and goats and cattle. It's transmitted 3 ways. Inhalation of spores. It would take 2 to 60 days to develop pulmonary edema, and it's 90% fatal. You can contact it with cutaneous exposure, like the anthrax spores that were in the mail. People opened the mail and touched it. It would take up to 7 days to cause a painless necrotic lesion, the Escher. And you can ingest it, ingest the spores, and that would take up to 7 days as well. So person-to-person transmission is rare with anthrax. You usually have to be exposed to the anthrax itself, except for cutaneous. Sometimes it can be passed. And the vaccines are highly effective, but they're just not readily available to everybody. So here's a picture of a spore in lung tissue. And this is the Escher, the necrotic lesion on the forearm. Next one is botulism. It's an anaerobic gram-positive bacillus that has a spore phase. It's a potent neurotoxin, and as everybody knows, it prevents muscle contraction. So used correctly, I guess it can make you look younger, but it can also kill you. So it's the most poisonous substance known to mankind. The transmission, several ways. Ingestion in the food, and that would take up to 36 hours to affect you. Aerosolization, inhalation, or injection. So it's not transmitted person to person. There are new vaccines available, but they're not recommended yet. Foodborne botulism. What happens if you eat something bad and you get botulism? You develop weakness and dizziness in 1 to 2 days after eating the food. And then you get double vision, dilated pupils, constipation, dry mouth, abdominal pain, but you don't have a fever. You develop progressive, symmetric, flaccid, descending paralysis. And your head, your jaw, your face, your upper airways, it moves down until it affects your breathing, and that is what kills people. Smallpox is another one we have to be aware of. The transmission is airborne in contact. It causes acute generalized vesicles and pustules. The incubation period is up to a week. You have a prodrome first, abrupt onset of fever that lasts 1 to 4 days, and then you kind of feel achy, headachy, nausea, vomiting, backache. And then later, you develop, 21 days later, a rash. And the lesions are likely to be on the palms and the soles of the feet in over half the cases. And they're all at the same stage of development, which is very much unlike chickenpox. And the last reported wild case was 1977. So hopefully it stays that way. The rash, there is a mucous membrane rash that appears 24 hours before the skin rash. That's where dentists come in. An oral vesicular rash that shows up quickly. And that saliva viral titer is extremely infectious. The progression of smallpox, you have an incubation period, a prodrome stage, then macules, papules, vesicles, pustules, scabs, and scars. So day 4 in the upper left, day 6, upper right, day 8, lower left, and day 13, lower right. So that's one of the last cases. The pustule lesions may develop on the hands or palms of the feet, and then you see that how they look on the upper picture, and sometimes the lesions are totally different. They look flattened, again, occurring on the hands and soles of the feet. Differential diagnosis, smallpox versus chickenpox. Smallpox, deep, hard lesions, well circumscribed, round, confluent, or umbilicated, and the lesions are all at the same stage of development. Whereas chickenpox, you have superficial lesions. They're not well circumscribed. They may have vague borders, and confluence or umbilication is uncommon. They're flatter, and the lesions are at all stages of development. Like you see here, this is chickenpox. You've got little ones, new ones, pustular ones, fading ones, starting ones. Smallpox, chickenpox. Smallpox, chickenpox. See the difference? And look at the distribution. Smallpox is not so much the trunk, more the head and the limbs. Chickenpox is more the face and the trunk. The infection prevention and control, you can be vaccinated against smallpox. Some of us remember getting this. It looked like that when we got it, and then it developed into a little lesion. How many of you have a scar on your arm? It tells you how old you are. Guess what you've got? Only the scar and no immunity. It faded long ago. So we're all sitting ducks for smallpox, whether you have the vaccine or not. The best way to protect yourself is respiratory protection, and we're getting good at that. Now we know that. So if you see anything, you notice and report any unusual cases, clusters of events, unusual symptoms, timing, unusual pattern, unexplained number of dead animals or birds, a lower attack rate for those that were indoors, a large number of rapidly fatal illnesses, any patient presenting with uncommon disease with bioterrorism potential. We should be reminded to take the information down and report it. And it's easier to do if you have all the numbers written down where you can get them easily and you don't have to go look them up in the moment. So here's some more resources for you, and that's also in the handout. So until next year or whenever we meet again, practice and be ready. Hopefully, you'll never have to use any of this information. All right.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. And if we have any questions for you, we'll post them. We'll get in contact with you and post them on our Facebook page. So thank you again, and everyone have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Take care.